Let's talk about the question that keeps a lot of people stuck before they even begin. Am I too old for law school? I've heard this from people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. They'll say things like, I haven't been in the classroom in 20 years. Everybody else is going to be younger, smarter, and faster. It's too late to start over. I've got a mortgage, a kids, a full-time job. How could I possibly fit all of this in? Now, here is the truth. Those concerns are completely valid. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You're not making excuses here. You're asking real questions that deserve real answers. But just because those fears are common doesn't mean that they're true. You are not too old. You are not behind. You are right where you should be. Law school is not just for 22-year-olds who live off ramen and have zero responsibilities. In fact, older applicants, so-called non-traditional students, have some of the highest success rates in law school. Reason being, they've got skills that most traditional law students haven't had the time to develop yet. Things like managing time without anybody babysitting you, being able to write clearly under pressure, speaking with confidence to people in positions of authority, juggling work, family, health, finances, and still showing up every single day. These are not soft skills, they are survival skills, and they are exactly what law school and being a lawyer actually requires. Now, I'm going to be blunt with you, law school is hard, but being 40 or 50 or 60 or even 30 isn't what makes it hard. What makes law school hard is walking in without a plan, without support, and without the maturity to handle setbacks. And if you're in your 30s or 40s or beyond, you already do have that maturity. You've already handled things way harder, like job loss, parenting, health scares, difficult bosses, major life changes, and law school will test you, but it's not going to break you. And if you're thinking, will admissions officers even take me seriously? The answer is absolutely yes. In fact, many of them prefer candidates who have more life experience because you're more likely to finish what you start. You're more likely to contribute meaningfully to classroom discussions and actually use your degree instead of treating law school like a backup plan. So if you're even considering law school and you're over 30 or 40, let me be clear, you do belong in law school. Not in spite of your age, but because of everything you've learned along the way. Now let's dig into the biggest myth that keeps people over 30 or 40 out of law school. The idea that somehow age is a disadvantage. That admissions is sitting in a room thinking to themselves, why would we take somebody who's 45 when we could admit some 22-year-old with a 4.0 GPA? Now let me tell you exactly what's happening behind the scenes. Every law school admissions committee wants three things: people who will succeed in law school, people who will pass the bar exam, and people who will actually use their degree and reflect well on the school after graduation. That is the game. And when you're older, when you're more experienced, and when you're clear on why you want to go to law school, you actually check all three of those boxes better than many younger applicants. Because when you're older, you're not applying to law school on a whim. You're not going just because everybody else is going or because you don't know what else to do after undergrad. You're going because you've got a purpose, and that shows up everywhere in your application. Your personal statement's more focused, your interviews are more confident, and your answers are grounded in real-world experience, not just classroom theory. You know who you are, and you're not afraid to say it. And that kind of clarity is powerful, and it's also rare. Also, I want you to think about what law school is really asking of students. They want you to read hundreds of pages a week. They want you to write clearly and persuasively under pressure, to analyze complex problems that have no clear answers. They want you to be able to speak up in front of a room full of smart people and manage constant deadlines while staying calm and focused. If this sounds familiar, and it should, it's because if you've had any kind of real career, you've already done those things. Maybe not in a courtroom, but definitely in meetings, reports, negotiations, and high-stakes projects. Now compare that to a KJD, a 22-year-old who hasn't had a boss, never missed rent, never handled a real crisis, and they're going to ask who's more prepared. And so Your age, if you're older, is not a weakness, it is a filter. If you're applying at 45, you've already proven that you're serious. You're not chasing prestige, you're not here for the frat parties, you're here to learn, to grow, and to make your career count. And that is what law schools want. Now, here's something else. Law schools want a diverse incoming class, diversity of background, race, life experience, and age. And a classroom full of younger people only with the same major and the same worldview isn't just boring, it's actually bad for legal education. You're going to add value by showing up with a different lens, and you're going to help your classmates grow too. And so, if you've ever worried about being the oldest person in the room, I want you to flip that mindset. You're not the outlier, you are the anchor because you've been through real things. You've made mistakes. You've solved problems under pressure. And that's what law school is training you for, and that's what you already bring to the table. Now, let's get even more specific here. I want you to stop thinking of your age or your experience as something you need to apologize for on your application. Because law school is not just about who can memorize cases, it's about who can think, communicate, and navigate high-pressure situations without falling apart. And that's where real-world experience gives you an edge that's hard to teach. Now, let me give you a real example. One of my students, we'll call her Angela, she was in her early 40s when she started law school. She had a full-time job, 2 kids, a mortgage, and she was juggling more in one day than most of her classmates had ever dealt with. And midway through her first semester, one of her professors moved up a major deadline with no warning. The younger students freaked out, they were complaining in the group chat, they were pulling all-nighters and panicking, but Angela just opened up her calendar, moved a few things around, and then she walked into her professor's office, calmly explained her situation, and requested an extension with a backup plan for how she would stay on track. And the professor just gave it to her without any pushback. Not because she was older, but because she knew how to communicate clearly, manage expectations, and present a solution. And that's what experience looks like. Now, you don't have to have a prestigious background to bring real-world value to law school. You don't have to be a CEO or have 20 years at a law-adjacent nonprofit. You could have worked in retail management as a teacher, in healthcare and logistics, as a stay-at-home parent, or run your own business. Doesn't matter. All of those experiences have a couple of key things in common: decision-making, conflict resolution, clear communication, time management, and learning how to deal with unexpected problems. If this sounds familiar, it's because these are the same skills your professors are going to want in the classroom and your future clients are going to demand in the real world. And so when you bring those with you into law school, you're not playing catch up. You're already fluent in the language of responsibility. And your classmates might know the case law better on day one, and that's fine, but you're going to be the one they come to when the pressure's on because they know that you're not going to crumble. So let's talk strategy when it comes to admissions, because if you are an older applicant, there are going to be parts of the admissions process that do look different when you're applying later in life. And if you understand this up front, you can plan for these differences and turn them into advantages. First, your undergraduate GPA. If you graduated from law school 10, 20, maybe even 30 years ago, your transcript might feel like ancient history, and maybe it's not your proudest moment. Maybe you struggled or switched majors, and that's okay. Admissions officers are trained to read for context. They know that who you were at 19 is not who you are at 45. In fact, they're often going to de-emphasize your old GPA if you can show a strong track record of more recent success, like professional accomplishments, career advancement, writing samples that show clarity and logic, or any continuing education since undergrad. In other words, law schools will discount your undergraduate GPA in favor of your more recent experiences. Now let's talk about letters of recommendation, because if you worry that you haven't spoken to a college professor in decades, that's okay. You don't need academic references from several years ago. Law schools are flexible. If you can't get one from a professor, ask for someone who can speak to your intellectual ability, your work ethic, writing skills, leadership, judgment, and your ability to grow when challenged. And all of this could be from folks in the workforce. And so if you've had a manager, a supervisor, a client, or collaborator who can speak to those qualities, use them, especially if you've worked closely with them or you solved difficult problems together. The key is to be intentional. Choose people who know you well, who respect you, and who are willing to write specifically. You don't want generic letters. Now, let's talk about your resume. If you've been working for 15, 20, 30 years, it is okay if your resume is longer than one page. The one-page rule is more for 22-year-olds who don't have quite as much work experience yet. But if you're older, you've had a career, maybe multiple, you've led teams or launched projects, you can't shrink that down to only a couple of bullet points. But your resume should still be focused, and you want to use it to build a narrative. You want to highlight roles and accomplishments that show growth, responsibility, and relevance to legal thinking. That might mean emphasizing leadership positions, writing or analytical roles, experience navigating rules, regulations, or compliance issues, jobs that required negotiation, research, or advocacy, and any public speaking or training that you've done. Now, you do want to cut away the fluff and focus only on the parts of your story that support your decision to go to law school now. And same goes for your personal statement, by the way. You don't need to explain everything you've ever done, just tell a focused story. Like, what led you to choose law school now? What have you done that proves that you're ready? And what will you bring to your future classmates and the legal field? Your idea here is to show a pattern, not just laundry list your jobs. So let's say you get into law school, you're sitting in a first-year contracts class, and you're thinking, what did I just sign up for? And I know that walking into law school later in life could feel awkward at first. There will be moments where you question whether you belong, but once the semester actually gets going, everybody, no matter their age, is going to be humbled by the demands of law school. They're going to hit a wall. They're going to have that moment where they read a case 3 times and can't figure out what the court is talking about. That is law school, and as an older applicant, you already know how to get through hard things without spiraling. You've probably had bosses who demanded impossible things and dealt with unclear expectations. And that is what law school is. It is uncomfortable by design. Professors are going to cold call you. You'll be expected to argue both sides of a case, and you'll be told there's no right answer, but still be graded as if there is. The younger students are often still figuring out how to manage failure without falling apart, but you already have those tools because you've been through real life, and that is not something you can cram for. And when it comes to classroom discussions, one of the biggest advantages you bring is your perspective. If you've worked in healthcare, education, or business, or even raised a family, that lived experience gives you insight into how laws play out in real life, not just how they're written. And so when you speak up in class, you're not just talking in hypotheticals. You can say, actually, I dealt with a case like this when I was managing HR at my old job, or I saw this kind of legal issue come up when I worked in real estate. In other words, you bring context, and professors love that. Now let's talk social life for a second, because this is where most non-traditional students think they're going to be left out. And you might not vibe with a crowd who's partying every Thursday night, but law school social life isn't just parties. You're going to find people you connect with through study groups, clubs, or even just shared values. And there are more non-traditional students than you probably realize. There are parents, career changers, veterans, students who took years off to work, people going to law school at night while working full-time, and many law schools now have dedicated student organizations for non-traditional students. And if they don't, you could start one. Law schools love students who build community and take on leadership roles. And the reality is that everybody in law school is struggling in some way. Everybody is under pressure. And everybody wants someone who gets it. And more often than not, younger students appreciate the calm, grounded energy that older law students bring. They're going to look to you for perspective. Now, the one thing that stops more non-traditional law school applicants than anything else is the LSAT. It's usually not the GPA or the essays or even the cost. It's fear of the LSAT. And if you've been out of school for 10, 15, or 30 years, it makes sense because you might not have taken a standardized test in decades. You might not remember the last time you studied with flashcards or took timed practice tests. And when you hear things like, this test is harder than the SAT, or you need a top percentile score just to be competitive, the anxiety kicks in. So yes, the LSAT is challenging, and yes, you probably feel rusty at first, and yes, you may have to work harder to rebuild test-taking stamina, but none of that means that you can't succeed. I've worked with students in their 40s, 50s, even 60s who crushed the LSAT, not because they had a photographic memory or magical test-taking skills, because they approached it with discipline. They didn't wing it, they didn't cram, they didn't burn out after 3 days of studying. They treated it like a job, like training for a marathon. They built a system and they followed it. That means studying for a couple hours a day consistently instead of 10 hours once a week. It means doing focused drills, not just timed tests, so that you actually build skills. It also means reviewing your mistakes deeply so you don't repeat them. It means tracking your progress to make sure you're improving week by week and practicing endurance. But first and foremost, you begin studying for the LSAT by building a strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types. Now, you don't have to score a 175 to get into a great law school. There are nearly 200 ABA-approved law schools in the US, and many of them welcome non-traditional applicants, and they look at your application holistically. That means your LSAT score is just one piece of the puzzle. If you can combine a solid LSAT score with strong essays, a thoughtful resume, great letters of rec, and a clear sense of purpose, it's often more persuasive than a 172 from somebody who has no idea why they're applying, because getting the best score is of course worth it because it leads to better odds of admission, more scholarship money, and more options when it comes to choosing the right school for you. But don't think of yourself as being bad at tests. Just realize that you're out of practice, and that's a huge difference because being out of practice means you just haven't done it in a while, and that's fixable. You can get better at this. You can train your brain to move faster through dense reading passages. You can learn how to spot flaws in arguments, not overnight, but week by week with a focused plan. And so the mindset shift for you here is, rather than asking, can I do this? It's, do I want this badly enough to figure it out? And if the answer is yes, then guess what? You will.